Hi, welcome to Veteach. I am here with yet another reading comprehension exercise today. You have to know that reading comprehension is an integral part of any English competitive exam that you might take. There is absolutely no campus recruitment exam without reading comprehension. In this particular section, they are going to assess your language skills, your verbal ability skills, your grammar, vocabulary, and your knowledge on the language. So it is very important for you to read the passage carefully and choose the right answers from the alternatives given under the question. Now let's go solve this passage together. Like you can see here, this particular passage has been given in bank PO exam in the year 1995. You might want to pay close attention to such kind of passages because these are the kind of passages they are going to ask in your campus recruitment exams such as Wipro, TCS and Infosys. So now let's go read the passage. The recent passage of the bill on the transplantation of human organs by Parliament is a long overdue measure aimed at curbing widespread trafficking in organs, especially kidneys. As the only country where kidneys can be transplanted from donors unrelated to the patient, India and notably Bombay has gained international notoriety as the capital of the organ trade. So what is the passage saying up until here? So there has been a bill that has been passed which is aimed at curbing widespread trafficking in organs, especially kidneys. Now, what is the meaning of the word overdue here? Overdue means something that should have been done a long time ago. So the author is of an opinion that this particular bill should have been passed a long time ago. So apparently India is the only country where kidneys can be transplanted from donors unrelated to the patient, which means anybody can donate their kidneys to anybody. From donors unrelated to the patient, India and notably Bombay, and especially Bombay, has gained international notoriety. What is the meaning of the word notoriety? Notoriety means being famous for something bad, right? Being famous in a bad way. So Bombay is famous in a bad way as the capital of the organ trade. Wealthy patients from India and abroad, unscrupulous doctors and rapacious brokers. Now what is the meaning of unscrupulous? Unscrupulous means unethical, right? Unscrupulous means unethical. Unethical doctors and rapacious brokers. Rapacious means greedy. Greedy brokers have made this a multi-crore racket. Now wealthy patients from India and abroad, unethical doctors and greedy brokers have made this a multi-crore racket in which the only loser is the impoverished. Impoverished means weak or poor. Who's at the loss here? Only the poor or the weak. Donor parting with an organ for a small amount. Parting with an organ for small money, right? Now, only the donor who's impoverished is at the loss for donating his organ for a small amount of money. The legislation strikes at such exploitative transactions by stipulating that blood relations and spouses are the only live donors from whom kidneys can be transplanted and making the buying and the selling of human organs a cognizable offense. Now, the legislation has striked at such exploitative transactions by stipulating. Stipulating means demanding or specifying. Specifying in a formal way, in an official way. Demand or specify. So the legislation has said that blood relations and spouses can only donate, right? Are these blood relations and spouses are the only ones who can donate kidneys, and it has also made buying and selling of human organs a cognizable offense. Now here you have to know that cognizable offense is a technical term, right? And you do not necessarily have to know the meaning of such technical terms. Now, in such kind of passages, you're going to see a lot of technical terms. It is not necessary that you have to know the meanings of all these technical terms. You just have to consider the context. When you keep reading, you'll understand what exactly they're talking about, all right? By allowing the transport of cadaver organs, now what is the meaning of cadaver? Cadaver is dead. Cadaver means dead or corpse. You know what a corpse is, right? Dead. Let's call it dead. By allowing the transport of dead organs, the act not only opens new avenues in the treatment of renal failure, again, renal failure. This is again a technical term. You do not necessarily have to know the meanings of all of these words, right? It's just general knowledge. So cadaver organs, the act not only opens new avenues in the treatment of renal failure, where the availability of donor kidneys falls for short of demand, but paves the way for liver transplants for which expertise exists in India. So by allowing the transport of cadaver organs, the act opens new avenues in the treatment of renal failure, so in this particular section, when it comes to renal failure, the availability of donor kidneys is very short. Right? Not only that, it also paves the way for liver transplants for which expertise exists in India already. The statutory recognition of brain stem death, which is accepted medical practice the world over, widens the scope of cadaver transplant by making beating heart cadavers another source for donor organs. Moving on. True, the mere enactment of such legislation cannot put an end to an entrenched practice that thrives on patronage from sections of the medical community and political and public apathy. So, now what is the meaning of entrenched here? Entrenched is ingrained. Ingrained means which is unlikely to change. True, the mere enactment of such legislation cannot put an end to an entrenched practice that thrives on patronage. What is thriving on patronage? What is patronage here? Patronage means being supported by a patron. Who's a patron? Patron is someone who supports financially or in general, right? Someone who supports an individual or an organization. From sections of the medical community and political and public apathy. What is the meaning of apathy here? Apathy is lack of interest, showing lack of interest, right? So the author is saying that just the enactment of this legislation cannot put an end to this ingrained practice, which has been going on since a long time. Just enactment of such legislation cannot put an end to something that has been ingrained in our minds, in our society for such a long time. That thrives on patronage. Patronage means someone supported by a patron, right? From sections of the medical community and political and public apathy. The delay of nearly 2 years between the introduction of the bill and its passage and the attempts of people with vested introduce certain dubious amendments are an indication of what the law is up against. The delay. So apparently there has been a delay of nearly 2 years between the introduction of the bill and the passage of the bill, and the attempts of people with vested interest to introduce certain dubious. Now, what is the meaning of dubious? Dubious is doubtful or suspicious, right? So the author is saying that there are people whose interests are to introduce doubtful amendments against this law, which means there are people who are against this law, right? So the delay of nearly 2 years between the introduction of the bill and its passage and the attempts of people with vested interest to introduce certain doubtful amendments are an indication of what the law is up against. The effectiveness of the law will depend therefore on the state's determination to implement it through vigilant monitoring. So the author is saying that the effectiveness of this law will depend therefore on the state's determination, on the government's determination to implement it through watchful monitoring, to continuous monitoring. He's saying that the government has to have its eye on its implementation for this law to actually work, for this law to actually be effective. The provisions for cadaveric transplants will remain on paper in the absence of public education to encourage the voluntary donation of bodies and organs, overcoming religious taboos, and the setting up of institutional facilities for organ retrieval and storage. So, the author is saying that the provisions for cadaveric transplants will remain on paper. If there is no voluntary donation of bodies and organs, overcoming religious taboos, without people coming volunteering to donate their bodies or their organs, and without the setting up of institutional facilities, without there being facilities for organ retrieval and storage, this law is only going to be on paper, right? This is only going to remain on paper, and this is not going to work without all of these. Most of all, the law rests on the realization by medical professionals that ethical and humane values must prevail over other considerations. Most of all, the law rests on the realization by medical professionals. So the author is saying that this law rests on the realization by medical professionals that ethical and humane values must prevail over other considerations. So the medical professionals has to believe that ethical and humane values win over other considerations. They have to give first priority to their ethical and human values. Prevail over means win. The removal of organs from unrelated donors is almost invariably a transfer of health from the poor and weak to the rich. It cannot be defended on any ground. So the removal of organs from unrelated donors. If the hospitals are going to accept donations from unrelated people, it is almost like transferring health from the poor to the rich. Right? And this cannot be defended on any ground. This cannot be justified and defended on any ground. Now let's go solve the questions. Question number 1. Which of the following means thrives on patronage? So I said thrives on patronage. What is a patronage? Patronage is being supported by patron. Now who is a patron? Patron is someone who is of support, who provides support to organization or an individual, right? Which means support, thrives on support. So what is the meaning of thrives on patronage? Thrives on support. Now let's look at the options. Option A, support the practice. B, confusion by the patron. C, prospers on support. D, fails in spite of support. E, disintegrates. So the closest of options is C, prospers on support. Which of the following is the meaning of the phrase parting with as used in the passage? Now, here in the question, it is being mentioned very clearly that as used in the passage. Now, you cannot take just the literal meaning of that particular word, of that particular phrase. You just cannot take the literal meaning of it. You have to consider the context of the passage. Which of the following is the meaning of the phrase parting with as used in the passage? Option A, sacrificing. Option B, fall in line. C, coming together. D, partition into two. So, when you look at the passage, the only loser is the impoverished donor parting with an organ for small amount of money, which means he's sacrificing his organ for money. So the answer is sacrifice. Option A, sacrifice. Question number 3, which of the following is the reason for Bombay gaining international notoriety? Now, why is Bombay famous in a bad way? Why has it gained international notoriety? Option A, human organs like kidney are smuggled here. Option B, there is no legislation against kidney transplantation. Option C, there are international underworld gangs operating. Option D, even patients from other countries come here for kidney transplantation donated by poor people. Option E, none of these. Let's go look at the passage once just to be sure. As the only country where kidneys can be transplanted from donors unrelated to the patient, India and notably Bombay has gained international notoriety as a capital of organ trade. International notoriety. What does international notoriety mean? That means internationally it is famous as the capital of the organ trade. What is the closest of options? Even patients from other countries come here for kidney transplantation donated by poor people. And there has been a mention of international. The option you have to go with is D. Which of the following is one of the features of the bill? Option A, it allows for transplant of only cadaver organs. B, hefty sum is to be paid to the donors. C, total ban on kidney transplantation. Option D, only blood relations and spouses can be the live donors. Option E, none of these. The entire passage has been about this. So the option is D, only blood relations and spouses can be the live donors. Question number 5, which of the following would be an impediment in getting donation of cadaver organs? Impediments means obstacle. Now the question is, what would be an obstacle in getting donation of cadaver organs? Option A, storage problems. Option B, religious taboos. Option C, absence of adequate legislation. D, effective implementation of law. Let's see the passage. The question is that impediment, what would be an impediment in getting donation of cadaver organs? So the question is, what would stop the donors from donating the cadaver organs, right? What would be it? Storage problems. What would stop the donors to donate? The answer to this is, since it has been mentioned in here that the provisions for cadaveric transplantation will remain on paper in the absence of public education to encourage the voluntary donation of bodies and organs, overcoming religious taboos, right? What would stop a donor from donating? And the answer to that question is B, religious taboos. In this particular section, they are going to assess your verbal ability, your language skills, your grammar, vocabulary, and your knowledge on the language. So it is very important for you to read the passage carefully and choose the right answer from the alternatives given under the question. Now let's go solve this passage together. Let's read the passage. The stock taking done at the first National Convention on Consumer Protection served to highlight the areas that called for special attention to sustain the momentum of the movement as genuine forum for safeguarding the people's interests. So the first National Convention on Consumer Protection has been conducted, and it has served to highlight the areas that called for special attention to maintain the momentum of the movement as genuine forum for safeguarding the people's interests. I hope it's clear up until here. Spreading awareness about the rights of the consumers and the relief open to them in case they did not get their money's worth of goods and services has rightly been identified as the first priority. Now, what has been identified as the first priority? Spreading awareness about the rights of the consumers and the relief open to them in case they did not get their money's worth of goods and services. Moving on, while this may not be a difficult task in urban areas where the movement is concentrated at present, taking it to the vast rural hinterland calls for a multimedia approach in which radio and television have a crucial role to play. Now, this particular awareness, so bringing awareness in consumers about their rights may not be a difficult task in urban areas because this is where the movement has been concentrated. But taking it to the vast rural hinterland, what is the meaning of hinterland? Hinterland is remote areas. Now, taking it to the vast rural remote areas needs a multimedia approach in which radio and television play a crucial role. The involvement of the 500 odd consumer organizations in the country in publicizing the concept of practices and the remedies available against their violation will prove rewarding if the message is conveyed through village bodies. If there are 500 odd consumer organizations in the country trying to publicize the concept of fair trade practices and the remedies and bringing awareness in consumers about the remedies available against the violation will be fruitful only if the message is conveyed through village bodies. Now, what does that mean? That means that the movement has to be countrywide. It has to reach nooks and corners in the country, right? Only then it is going to be fruitful. Government efforts remain confined at best to setting up the infrastructure after the formal launch of the movement with the enactment of the Consumer Protection Act. The mounting backlog of cases in consumer courts points to the need for toning up the district level redressal machinery. What does this paragraph say? Government efforts, the most the government has to do is to set up the infrastructure, and that's all, right? To set up the infrastructure. Now, what does this paragraph say? The most the government has to do is to set up the infrastructure after the formal launch of the movement with the enactment of the Consumer Protection Act. So the most it has to do is to set up the infrastructure. The mounting backlog. What does mounting backlog? Mounting is increasing. Backlog is unfinished, right? Incomplete. The increasing unfinished cases in consumer courts points to the need for toning up the district level redressal machinery, right? Redressal here is compensation. It calls for compensation machinery. Moving on to the next paragraph, the main objective of the movement is the creation of a culture that denies place in the market for products that are not consumer friendly. So what is the main objective of the movement? It is to create a culture that denies place in the market for products that are not consumer friendly. This is possible only if consumer bodies take over the watchdog role performed by the government till now and exercise social control over the market to see that the benefits of liberalization are not reaped by traders alone. Now, so the creation of this culture is going to be possible only if the consumer bodies take over the role of watchdog that the government has been performing up until now and exercise social control over the market, right? To see the benefits of liberalization are not just enjoyed by the traders alone, but the plea to industry to exercise self-regulation and maintain minimum standards of quality and devise appropriate pricing is bound to go unheeded unless strict measures are taken to ensure compliance. Now, what does this last part of the paragraph say? Just by requesting the industry to exercise self-regulation is to looking over themselves, to exercise self-regulation and maintain minimum standards of quality and devise appropriate pricing is bound to go unheeded. What is the meaning of unheeded? Unheeded is disregarded. Disregard. It is going to be disregarded unless strict measures are taken to ensure compliance. Unless it is made sure. Now, it is going to go disregarded unless strict measures are taken to ensure compliance, unless it is made sure that it is being obeyed, right? Now let's go solve the questions. The first National Convention on Consumer Protection has option A, highlighted the areas for special attention, option B, spread awareness about consumer rights, option C, specified in relief open to the consumer, and option D, given it a momentum. Now, it has been mentioned in the first paragraph that the first National Convention on Consumer Protection served to highlight the areas that called for special attention to maintain the momentum of the movement. Now, the option to question number 1 is option A, highlighted the areas for special attention. Question number 2, Consumer Protection Act proposes to give the consumer protection against option A, highly priced substandard goods, B, cheating by selling substandard goods, C, not getting his money's worth, D, denial of relief if the product is not up to the mark. Firstly, what is the meaning of substandard? Substandard is not up to the mark. It has been mentioned in the last paragraph, that the main objective of the movement is the creation of a culture that denies place in the market for products that are not consumer friendly. So the answer to question number 2 is option B, cheating by selling substandard goods. Question number 3, government contributed to the consumer protection movement by option A, toning up a district level of redressal machinery, B, clearing the backlog cases in the consumer court, C, setting by infrastructure, and D, enactment of the Consumer Protection Act. Now, it has been mentioned in the second paragraph that the government efforts remain confined at best to setting up the infrastructure after the formal launch. So the answer to question number 3 is setting by infrastructure. Question number 4, spreading consumer protection movement to the rural areas needs option A, official patronage, B, a multimedia approach, C, consumer organization to canvass this, D, message to be conveyed by village bodies. And the answer to this is multimedia approach, which has been mentioned here in the passage, right? Taking it to the vast rural hinterland calls for a multimedia approach. Okay. Question number 5, role of consumer bodies is A, to maintain minimum standards of quality, B, to function as a watchdog, C, to make a plea to industry to exercise self-control, and D, to exercise self-control over the market. And that has been mentioned in the last paragraph. This is possible only if exercised social control over the market to see that the benefits of liberalization are not just reaped by traders alone. So the answer to question number 5 is D, to exercise self-control over the market. That's all for today's video, guys. Please come back for more videos. I hope you found this helpful.